Welcome to the Atheist Hour. My name is Gene Cook. If it sounds like I'm in a big hollow room, that's because I am. In fact, I just moved my studio, and I have yet to install the soundproof foam up on the walls, or the sound barriers that you put up on the walls. So I do kind of have an echo, hollow sound tonight, so please forgive me for that. Dr. Bob, are you with me?
Yes, I am there.
Okay, great. You're coming in loud and clear. We're having some technical problems. As I mentioned, I just moved my studio. And so I'm hoping that we have the Infidel Guy, Reggie, on line one. We don't. Okay. Reggie, if you're listening, maybe that's him there. Reggie, is that you?
This is I, and also Dr. Robert Price is on the line.
Okay.
Yeah, how you doing?
Great, great. Dr. Bob Price, can you hear me and Dr. Bob Morey okay?
Yes, sure.
Okay, great. Okay, so let me introduce our guest tonight, and we'll edit everything else out that's gone before so far.
Understood.
I have with me tonight, as Reggie mentioned, he didn't know that Dr. Bob was going to be. We got two Dr. Bobs.
Yes.
So I guess it's going to be my Dr. Bob against your Dr. Bob tonight. But so I'm going to have to refer to Dr.
Who weighs the most?
That's got to be me.
Well, it depends on when we had you weigh in. Dr. Morey has lost about 100 pounds.
Oh, I'm sure I beat him out easily.
Okay, you probably would. Dr. Morey is a pastor in Southern California. He pastors a church in Irvine, and I believe it's called Faith Community Church. Is that right, Dr. Morey?
That's right, and it's where we have the California Biblical University and Seminary as well.
Okay, and Dr. Morey has written, I believe, 47 books. Is that correct?
To my shame, it's 47.
47.
Whoa.
See, Malach Shlomo said, of the making of books, there is no end.
That's right. You're getting kind of lazy there, Dr. Morey. You need to...
Well, it is. I'm working on this big one. It's about 1,000-page manuscript, so it's a big one.
Okay. And...
Now, Reggie and Bob, you will love this one. It's where I'm refuting natural theology and all of the theistic proofs developed by Thomas Aquinas et al., and showing they're based on logical fallacies.
Yeah. So Dr. Bob Morey would be coming from the Reform perspective, the presuppositional perspective. And as Reggie mentioned, he has a PhD. I don't know if Reggie actually mentioned this, but he has a PhD in Islamic studies.
Wow.
And so, he's quite an educated man. And
that plus $1 will get you some hummus.
So most of us know the Infidel Guy, Reggie, at least most of my listeners, Reggie Finley. And Reggie hosts the website and the weekly radio program, The Infidel Guy, kind of a forum for atheism and free thinkers. And you're based in Atlanta, Georgia. Is that right, Reggie?
That's correct.
And why don't you introduce Dr. Bob Price, because I really don't know that much about him.
Well, I guess I should let Bob introduce himself, actually.
Okay.
But I can, but I think maybe Bob could do a better job.
Well, I am now hosting this Bible Geek show. I figured the Infidel Guy and the Bible Geek sounded like a pretty good pair, and it's a call-in show kind of modeled after one I used to listen to on family radio in New Jersey with Walter Bjork. I think it was called Bible Questionnaire or something, and I teach online at the fledgling Johnny Coleman Theological Seminary. I got a PhD in systematic theology from Drew University in 81 and a second PhD from the same place 12 years later in New Testament, and just am an avid reader in all these fields. I'm fascinated with Islamic studies as well, and I've gone through various theological permutations and now find myself at the same time a church-going Episcopalian and a board member of Atheist Alliance International, and having a great time with both hats.
Interesting, isn't it, Dr. Morey?
Well, that's what is called a theological schizophrenia.
Yeah, that's not a bad way of putting it.
So you actually teach a theology course, Dr. Price?
Yes, I teach biblical and theological courses, and not to very many students. Things just starting out. I have taught at Drew, at Mount Olive College, at Montclair State at different times over the years. But I'm kind of almost half retired doing writing these days more than anything else. I've had some books from Prometheus books recently, The Incredible Shrinking Son of Man, Deconstructing Jesus. The Da Vinci Fraud, and one I have coming out from them soon is The Reason-Driven Life, a rejoinder to the popular Rick Warren book. And so I do actually more writing than teaching these days.
Well, we would agree with you on the Da Vinci Fraud, but that's probably about where we would part company.
Probably on Rick Warren, the money-driven church, market-driven. Well, we're not sure what we're going to call it, but
yeah.
No, I like you. I picked up a doctorate at Westminster Seminary among the Presbyterians, and that was in apologetics, focusing on American indigenous religions, Jehovah's Witnesses, Mormons, more of the homegrown varieties. Then
fascinating.
I was got a PhD in Islamic studies because I've been teaching on Islam for about 25 years. My first book came out, by the way, Bob, before the Desert Storm War. It was called Islamic Invasion. It's in 9 languages, and it said there's hell to be paid because of the immigration of Islamic people that has not been at all governed or examined, and in the end result, there's going to be a lot of difficulties, particularly when it comes to violence. And, of course, that has all come true.
Yeah, it's
and then I got another doctorate.
But you're certainly right on the money.
Oh, my. Well, matter of fact, I've worked with the FBI for many years. I was on, thinking of Walter Bjork, I knew him. And Long John Nebel. I'm from New York City, Manhattan. I used to stay up at night listening to Long John Nebel. He'd have Walter Martin, a rabbi, a priest, an agnostic, an atheist. It was fascinating.
Oh, I'll bet.
And I had a radio program called Bob Morey Live on a secular station, a secular talk show. And the format was the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. And I blew up people, flushed them down toilets. We had a scandalously fun time, particularly during the Iraqi invasion. Oh, man, was that good.
Oh, I'll bet.
Well, let's see if we can have some scandalous fun tonight. Reggie's an atheist. I guess both of you are atheists. Dr. Price, would you consider yourself an atheist?
Yes, though I'm kind of a religion-friendly one, and I'm kind of a Jungian in a way. I sort of think that God is an archetype that lives within, not a being outside in the world. And so I side with atheists on some things and theists, or at least religious folks, on others. I admit it's kind of a weird mix.
Yeah. And the origin of man, where would you, what is your worldview concerning the origin of man?
It seems to me that evolution has so much evidence behind it, it's hard to imagine an alternative, so that's my working hypothesis.
Okay. And Reggie, would you be in agreement with that position there? You would consider yourself an evolutionist?
Thus far, I do not accept any magical hypothesis such as any god or gods placing us here on Earth completely intact with a particular plan in mind. No, so far it appears that however we got here, I don't think that is necessarily the case, but I'm leaning more toward slow evolutionary processes over time. Mm-hmm.
Slow. When you say slow, how slow are you talking? Are you talking about your adaptation or your acceptance of evolutionary models is slow, or slow evolution?
I mean, we could talk about, still even punctuated equilibrium would also still be slow in any term. But I guess, but relative to how long even human beings have been here, I mean, sure. I mean, I'm talking millions of years of evolution from our and early ancestors to our more modern form today. Yes.
Okay. And the last conversation that we had, it kind of centered around the existence of logic and morality. So do you believe that there are absolute moral standards? There are absolute laws of logic, for example?
do I believe there are absolute laws of logic? Well, I'm not a logician. I haven't really studied very much logic. But I would ask you to first, I guess, define for me, what are you talking about when you say logic?
Well, I'm talking about the boundaries, the perimeters by which men reason, by which they think. For example, the law of non-contradiction. A cannot be non-A at the same place, the same time. As a Christian, Dr. Morey and myself, we would see that as an objective, binding, universal law that is metaphysical. And we would see that as binding on us as well as you. So we're trying to get an idea of where you're coming from in your worldview and how you might employ the use of reason, or what place you might see reason taking in your worldview and in the way that you think and the way that you relate to people.
Well, you said a mouthful there. Well, first of all, when it comes to, I guess, logic, first of all, if we're talking about looking at what we know, you talked about the law of non-contradiction, so I assume you're talking about how one thing, as long as it remains in one respect, will remain that thing unless it's acted upon or changed in some way, so then therefore to be in a different state. Well, existence itself obviously is the opposite of nothing. So since things are automatically, it seems like the laws or logic is going to apply, provided you have an observer to, I guess, to talk about them. Otherwise, we wouldn't talk about any laws of logic. It wouldn't be anything worth even speaking on. I mean, we wouldn't be here to talk about it. But things exist already, and if things exist, then you can separate those things from other things. And I think in the human mind, that's what we do. We simply compartmentalize, we partition, we place things in particular categories so that we can act on the real world, on our world. Otherwise, if there wasn't any consistency, there wouldn't be a world to act upon. Things are, we exist, we act upon those things. I mean, I really don't understand what's so complicated.
Yeah, no, we agree. In fact, there wouldn't be any consistency, there wouldn't be any categories if the world was not made the way it is now. But see, from our perspective, from our worldview, we would see the existence of categories and the existence of things such as universal laws of logic. We would see those as an evidence, in fact, not just an evidence, but a precondition, or having the precondition that God himself exists. Because where do these laws come from? Where do these categories? I mean, I guess the thing that I have trouble with, and I'll let Dr. Bob Morey comment in a moment. The thing that I have trouble with is how in an evolutionary worldview, where we're all just bags of matter in motion, how we can define categories such as ducks and dogs and cats and horses and things like that. I mean, it seems to me that if we live in a world in which we're just biological bags of matter, that there are no categories, and not only are there no categories, but there's really no universal laws that are binding on the minds of men. So I'm wondering.
I'm not sure if that follows. Does it? But I'm sorry. Was Bob Morey going to say something? I don't mean to cut him off.
Well, I didn't know when I could jump in the party.
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
Well, what we're dealing with is the fact that atheism is defined by Bob is not the same kind of atheism as defined by Reggie or by George Smith or someone else. So we're dealing once again with the problem of meaning of words. For example, when you begin to talk about logic and laws of logic, you're actually referring to sentences written on a piece of paper having to do with observations of how language works or linguistics. Hegel, since Bob has been down this route, he probably would agree with me on this point. Hegel, of course, hit on a very interesting situation where a typical Aristotelian would say being versus non-being. Well, there are two categories, and given the law of non-contradiction, you either are or you aren't. And then, of course, he came up with the concept of becoming. So you end up with a dialectic synthesis in which you go from non-being to being, and becoming is both of those. And you rise to the synthesis, which is becoming. But, to start at this point of a discussion of sentences on a piece of paper, and particularly with Western European concepts of logic that our Eastern friends really they never got into that. So, for example, in Hinduism, we don't even exist. There is no physical reality. But in the Western European tradition, as stylized by Aristotle, people write down sentences on pieces of paper which reveal their observation of how language works, and that if I'm to talk to you and you were to talk to me, there's a subject-object relationship and there are rules that govern speech. I do not personally believe, Gene, that there are metaphysically out there floating around somewhere certain things called laws of logic. I don't believe that they exist. I can't bring you a pound of them. I think, again, we're talking culture, we're talking linguistics, we're talking language, and our problem is it looks like we have 4 different worldviews operating.
Well, when I say that the universal laws of logic are binding on all men, what I'm referring to is not that the laws of logic are out there floating around somewhere in no man's land. I would hold that the laws of logic transcend from the mind of God, that God is a God of reason. In fact, he calls his creation to reason with him in the scriptures. And he endows man with the ability to not only be a moral creature, but also a reasonable creature. He endows him to make reasonable decisions. And in doing so, he emulates, or he...
Well, see, this is the point. Once you get rid of God, and there's, of course, several books written by atheists in which they challenge the concept that logic is absolute. They state logic is relative, it is Western, it is a middle class, bourgeois. Once you pull the plug of God out of the bathtub, all of the things that depended upon God go down the drain, and including the concept that logic is fixed because it was imposed by the Creator and imprinted upon the mind of man. That goes down the drain, and everything else goes down the drain. But Christ, is it Christ?
No, Christ.
How do you like the Price is Right, as they used to
as T is in Paul.
Yeah.
Oh, okay, all right, Bob. You probably have faced the same problem in a postmodern world of the linguistics of this whole issue. What in the world is a scientific law? When I lecture on the philosophy of science, and you do the whole field, as far back as the Vienna School of Logical Positivism, but now you end up with the dancing woolly masters and the Zen and the Tao of physics. Everything has changed, and we can't talk as if we were living in the 1850s. Things have moved on. Do you sense this tension today, even in modern liberal theology, which no longer can talk about the fatherhood of God and the brotherhood of man, because the feminists would scream, that there are no foundations left for liberal religiosity that they can hang their hat on, as far as I can see?
Well, I find a certain distaste and impatience for a lot of liberal theology, in that it seems to me to, or at least today's liberal theology since the 70s, in that it strikes me as cynical and manipulative politics, just trying to, all this talk about a useful theology, what can we gull the poor pew potatoes with, so that we can convince them that feminism and abortion are right, and so forth. And it just seems to me uninteresting from a religious standpoint. These people have assumed the role of the Grand Inquisitor, only they have a left-wing agenda, not a right-wing one. So with that, and part of the... I think Andrea Dworkin is one a feminist philosopher who denies the validity or the utility of logic and says it's a male creation, and yet I'm sure none of these people can argue in any other way. But there are some religious thinkers I kind of like Don Cupid, who think that who are somewhat suspicious of traditional logic, and perhaps he's getting it from Jacques Derrida, who I really enjoy reading when I can understand him. And his approach is that he's using logic to sort of try to lift the corner of logic and see what lies beneath. He's sort of, I hate to use a cliche, but pushing the envelope. And he made me begin to think that perhaps, you mentioned the analogy with laws of science and nature. I believe in Mere Christianity, C.S. Lewis suggests that so-called laws of nature are really just names for observed regularities. And I begin to wonder if that's not what logic is, too, that perhaps it's a bunch of heuristic devices and rules of thumb that we do need in order to reason together, but whether they, what sort of basis and objective reality they have, I certainly am not, I don't feel confident to be able to judge, but I wonder if they do have any kind of universal validity, and partly, as you say, because of postmodernism, which
I even had a young lady, a feminist, send me her thesis at University of Pennsylvania that mathematics was a heterosexual white European plot against women and minorities. And she argued that this is how men keep their dominance over women, is because of the woman's inability to do her checkbook and balance it correctly.
Oh,
and of course, I pointed out to use logic to prove that logic isn't valid is once again slitting your own throat.
Plus playing into the worst chauvinist stereotypes, saying that, well, you know, we women, we're logic and math are so alien to us, we'd rather go by intuition. Surely you don't want to say that, but they do.
Well, this is the problem of what some of them are saying, or Mary Daly,
oh boy,
in her chapter, The Castration of God the Father. Once you
really
say anything goes, anything goes. When you say, Reggie, if someone said anything goes, everything is relative, anybody can have any view of God that they want, as long as it makes you happy, why would you object to that, Reggie?
Well, it's obvious that the civilization, and first of all, we all have our own idea about how we like for individuals to treat us, right? And the only way to hopefully maintain that image is to develop and nourish a society in which people feel the same way, or at least you try to enforce or teach that type of idea over and over again, because it helps protect you. It helps ensure a secure society, or not ensure it, but it tries to make it better. So that's why we do what we do. I mean, it just makes sense to me. If I were to start a civilization, that's pretty much how I do things. I'll say, oh, I don't want anybody stabbing me, so look, here's the first law, no killing, okay, because this obviously is not a good idea. Of course,
there was a show on Discovery
today.
Approach,
but I think there is some validity there.
Yeah, I think that is so, too, and to me, if there's any utility to appealing to fancy words like this, as I thought about this, I thought, well, what sort of an ethic am I hammering together that way when it's like natural law, but without the eternal law that Aquinas figured was behind it. If you just say what appears to be advisable to maximize freedom and enjoyment in societies, you come up with a kind of a rudimentary code of not stepping on one another's toes that most societies, in fact, have. How binding is that? What obligation does anyone have to not steal, not kill, not rape, and so forth? Well, it's impossible, I should think, to prove that it is wrong to flout these laws, but we can't afford to have people do it. So we try to catechize people and say it's wrong to steal, it's right to respect property, and in Kant's terms, that would mean we're reducing all of morality to hypothetical, prudential considerations, not categorical imperatives. There's no
It's a
absolute
social contract,
duty.
that's all.
If someone said, well, I would prefer to rape and steal and kill, even if you make me pay for it by electrocution or whatever, we'd still have to say, look, pal, we're not, we're going to try our best to stop you from doing it. It wouldn't really be a moral debate anymore. It would be a power game in the last analysis, but that's the way I think it probably boils down.
Does mob rule ever work? If you're actually talking about argumentum ad populum, something is wrong if 51% of the population feels that way?
Well, no, I'm talking about just a very rudimentary agenda, agenda that it seems like all societies have, that we can't get along if it's open season on theft, rape, murder, and child molesting and so on. We can't allow for this. There'll be all manner of other issues that have to be dealt with in very complicated ways, but it seems to me you don't really need a revelation or a metaphysic to explain why most societies have a rudimentary code of behavior, and that's probably good enough.
And in fact, they get more and more complex as well as technology increases also, by the way.
And of course, these difficult gray issues, nothing saves religious believers from them either. There are all kinds of, even appealing to Scripture, all believers have honest debates and problems trying to define it, thou shalt not kill, does that mean I have to be a pacifist? Some say yes, some say no. So we're sort of all in the same boat of trying to impose an exact grid on an ambiguous reality.
Let me just read a quote, if I may. This is a quote off of my website. It can be found on the homepage. If a person doesn't think there's a God to be accountable to, then what's the point of trying to modify your behavior to keep within the acceptable ranges? That's how I thought anyways. I always believed in the theory of evolution as truth, that we all just came from the slime. When we died, that was it. There was nothing. Jeffrey Dahmer, November 29th, 1994. I'm having trouble as I'm listening to both Reggie and Dr. Price. I'm having trouble trying to understand if there is no objective standard of morality outside of man, i.e. the Scriptures, then what do we say to a Jeffrey Dahmer that says, I'm going to do whatever I do, and this is because there is no God to be accountable for? Who are you to tell me otherwise?
Well, Dahmer claimed he believed what he was doing was wrong. He claimed he was not criminally insane. He shouldn't have done what he did. So I don't know that he believed he was sinning.
Well, of course, that's because the Bible says that the law of God was written on his heart. But in an evolutionary worldview, there is no right or wrong. Men just act out their passions, their impulses, and
well, no, it's not the war of all against all necessarily. People have set up slates of behavioral rules because most of us want to live peaceably together.
Yes, and we don't see this in nature either. By the way, we must also add
that's because we're not animals. We are made in the image of God.
The Discovery program today had a show on a certain kind of chimpanzees, which anthropologists have said reflect what primates should be. And they pointed out they had total sex all of the time, no male aggression, because the men were having sex, the males with the males, the males with the females, with the children, with this. And it was phenomenal as my wife and I watched this, and these anthropologists talk about a pure society that didn't have male aggression because the males had sex 2, 3, 4, 5 times a day, and therefore their stress was relieved. And, what we're dealing with, again, is argumentum ad populum. I will take the Islamic Ummah as an example. Muhammad married a girl when she was 6, took her to bed when she was 9. Mm-hmm. He also had the habit of raping the wives of the chief of the tribe that he conquered. He did so in public. He had sex slaves. He taught that one could go to paradise through murder. that rape was permissible. When you look at the violence, the jihads, you can take Fergosi's book on jihad. I think Prometheus even published that one. Here you have a society that has not only endured, but seems to be in the process of destroying Western society, and it is built on an ethic that is totally foreign to the Judeo-Christian ethic of love your neighbor, let's all get along and go along, whereas the Islamic terrorist says, no, I'm going to make war until either you become a Muslim or you accept the tax that you're not going to be equal before the law, and you will be treated in a citizenship less than full citizenship. How do you then deal with a culture, Islamic culture, that glorifies rape, murder, and all of that?
Well, this brings up a real interesting thing. For one thing, I think I remember the scene in Woody Allen's Manhattan where he's at some ultra effete cocktail party for the ERA, and somebody says that Woody Allen says, I read that Nazis are going to march in New Jersey. I think we should get some baseball bats and go over there and really explain things to them. And one of the snobs says, I read a real devastating op-ed piece on that at the Times. Satire is always better than physical force. And Woody says, no, I think when it's Nazis and guys in shiny boots, really the baseball bats work better. And
that's
Woody Allen. Something Rorty says that ultimately, if our presuppositions are incommensurable with one another, we don't have common ground to debate. Everybody is a presuppositionalist, and you can't wait till you can convince Hitler that he's wrong before you stand up to him. You just ultimately have to say, are we going to put up with this or not? I can't prove to him he's wrong about this Aryan Superman crap. We're just going to have to fight him, because he's got his presuppositions, so do the jihadists, and the circles don't seem to intersect.
So in an atheistic worldview, then what you're saying is might makes right.
No,
Yeah.
That's what it sounds like.
Well, no, I'm just saying we have an understanding that most people do seem to have around the world, that you want to live and let live if you can. And at least after your people are fed and clothed and so on, but if there's enough to go around, then, we'll all be a community. But if somebody then decides, no, we're the Borg and we're going to assimilate you, like the Muslim fanatics do, we have to say, are we going to put up with this? No, we're not. We can't prove to them that we're right, but do we even have to?
But what if they outnumber us? I mean, Islam is growing at a very fast rate. What if Islam eventually outnumbers not only Christians, but all the other worldviews in the world, and so they become the majority worldview, and they decide that jihad is what the majority of the people believe in. I mean, we all have this as our presupposition, so we're the guys that are in charge. I mean, what are you going to do then, or how would you exist in a world like that as an atheist? I mean, you'd have to just stand back and say, well, they outnumber us, so I guess they're the ones that are in control.
Well, I mean, would I want to become a martyr for Enlightenment values, or would I accept the creed of Islam? Or I'm not sure what you mean exactly.
No, I'm saying, okay, you're saying that we live in a society where the majority of the people they value peace, they value getting along with our neighbors, and therefore, when somebody like Hitler comes along, the majority of the people are going to oppose him, because the majority of the people would oppose that type of behavior or that type of worldview. But if it's simply the majority that dictates the worldview of the day, or what's acceptable and what's not acceptable, then things can change rather rapidly if something like Islam becomes the popular worldview on planet Earth. What are you going to do? I mean, as atheists, you just stand around and say, well, this is part of the course of nature. See, as Christians, we can say, no, Islam is wrong, no matter how many people believe it or subscribe to it. And the reason why we can say that is because God has declared that certain laws are binding on all men, regardless of your faith, regardless of who you think God is.
Of course, that's what the jihadists think, too. They just have a different set of scripture and laws in mind, don't they? I don't mean to be smart.
No. You're absolutely right.
Really,
right.
I'm very curious.
Well, they model. Islam is modeled after the Judaism and Christianity with the sacred scripture and someone speaking from the mountain, and Muhammad was the Rasul, actually meaning apostle. He's the next apostle after Paul, supposedly. I guess, Gene, what you're asking is this, if I can rephrase it.
Yes.
In Iran, it is permissible for a 54-year-old guy to marry a 9-year-old girl. Now, in this country, you would go to jail for having sex with a 9-year-old. But in Iran, it is permissible on the grounds that that's what Muhammad did, and, well, then it must be right. So there is, to quote Kissinger, there is a collision of culture that is taking place. Humanism, as a cultural phenomenon, is endurable as long as it retained echoes of its Judeo-Christian origin, such as the brotherhood of man, the unity and dignity of man, the value of human life, the valuing prosperity, education, enlightenment, political freedom, civil rights, human rights. But when humanism abandons all of that borrowed capital and just sort of dissolves into some kind of hedonistic, solipsistic worldview in which you're living only for pleasure and for yourself, then we're all in trouble.
Yeah, I used to think that was a caricature of humanistic values, and then I read here and there and hear people say things that do make it frighteningly apparent that they're...
Well, B.F. Skinner, at Harvard, Beyond Freedom and Dignity. I mean, B.F. Skinner's book, Beyond Freedom and Dignity, we've got to jettison the idea that there's unity, dignity, and freedom when it comes to human beings. We've got to throw out the idea of free will, the dignity of human life. All of that has to go. It has to go.
That's frightening stuff. Peter Singer is another example of that, unless I misunderstand him, where your dog may have more of a right to life than a
Yes. Well, why not?
The PETA people.
Why not?
My gosh, right, yeah.
In an atheistic worldview, why do I, eat a cow for lunch and yet, send Jeffrey Dahmer to the electric chair if we're just distant cousins of the cow?
We're different enough that there's a specialness to human life and human nature that we feel we need to preserve it and respect it, whereas the animals are below us, and we are exploiting them, and I don't feel too guilty about it.
Jeffrey Dahmer obviously didn't share your sentiments because he was willing to eat a human being for lunch just as well as a cow.
Well, though he thought it was wrong, at least he claimed he did, that he was sinning and going against his own conscience.
Well, there are cultures, of course, where cannibalism was ritualistically, be it the American Indian, Central American, and other situations where eating the brains, you got the intelligence of your enemy. Eating the testicles, you got the virility. Again, it's very tricky as long as humanism and liberalism retains its echoes of its Judeo-Christian background, like, for example, mankind, to even talk about that, beside the feminists screaming at this moment. There was the National Anthropological Seminar in Washington, D.C., where they discussed two problems. Since we've thrown out the Bible and the Adam and Eve model, how can we put upon some intellectual basis the idea of the unity and dignity and civil rights of human beings? And of course, what's that professor at Columbia University who denies all of that and says the Asians came from orangutans, the Europeans came from lemurs, and the blacks came from chimpanzees, and there is no unity of humanity. They're just different competing primates. I forget, what is the name of that guy? Columbia University.
Remember
him,
that.
the big flash? Pardon me?
I mean, it sounds like an interesting theory. If
I've heard it
evolution is
before.
correct, I mean, he might
It's
be
been
onto
discounted.
something. I'm sure Reggie wouldn't be very happy with that.
I've heard that before. I've done some reading on that a couple of years ago. It's been discounted, though.
That's completely new to me. I'm amazed. Can you guys help me understand something? I'm not saying this as let me trap them. That's not my motivation, but I wonder if I've misunderstood something, or if you can clear it up anyway. There are two things here. One, why is it not just as arbitrary to say that we know what the Bible says is true, and therefore we've got a lock on objective morality and so on? Why is it different when Christians say that from when the Muslims say that about the Quran and so forth? Aren't they both sheer affirmations? Aren't they just dogmatizing? I just mean to say I don't see what the difference is. I'm not trying to make any claim about it. And secondly, if you say logic is established and morality is established by the decree of God, why aren't we stuck with divine voluntarism, which would seem to evacuate either logic or morality of any inherent validity? Wouldn't it depend upon the whim of God rather than being actually right or actually logical? It seems to me divine voluntarism would destroy the objectivity of morality and logic. So maybe I'm missing something, and I'm sincerely asking what you think of these questions.
Dr. Morey?
Well, again, since Islam attempted to copy off of the Christian and Judeo model, it's only a shadow reflection. So it's not a contrast to Christianity. It's a subtitle of a form of it that's a deviant. It's a heresy, is what it is. Same as communism. Marxism is a Christian heresy, because you had the whole idea of moving toward the millennial hope and all of that business.
Does that really matter? I mean, where they came from to get to it, they do have a different revelation claim and different values.
Yeah, but the different nature, but it's the same basic model. So your question does come down to the Judeo-Christian model found in the Bible, which is the book of Genesis, the Garden of Eden. There, the model is quite simple.
Vedanta Hinduism, then. I mean, just some other thing where they have their own
but they don't have
criterion and their own
propositional
version
truth.
of everything.
Yeah, well, here you have in the garden, man is created, and he is not created with the capacity to be the origin of truth, justice, morals, meaning, or beauty. God walks and talks with him in the garden as a theophany. He's actually in human form. He walks in some human form, and of course Christian theologians say that was the second person of the Trinity. And it is only because God in human form, talking to Adam and Eve, says, don't eat this tree, you can eat that one, not this one. You're here to fix the garden. And so you have the model that man is receiving, truth, justice, morals, meaning, and dignity, via special revelation of a personal creator who has a relationship with man, in which man is created with the capacity not only to listen, but to obey and to fulfill his purpose in the universe. Now, this is the model upon which the whole Bible is based. Now, the denial, the impossibility of the denial, the impossibility of the opposite, simply means once you deny that model that man is the receiver of truth, morals, meaning, and beauty, but man now is the origin of it, which is the essence of humanism. Man is the measure of all things, etc. When the rubber hit the road, the history of philosophy, theology has shown that whatever man creates, man destroys, and since we are all particulars in search of a universal to explain us, it ends in relativism. So the impossibility of the denial of the biblical model simply means you can't have morals, meaning, beauty, truth, simply on the basis of your own personal choices, experience, and feelings, rationalism, mysticism, intuitivism, or whatever it is. So that would be the position of a Christian apologist. The reason, one of the main reasons it is valid, is there is no ability to criticize it, no ability to stand on a pinnacle of truth without it. You have to assume it in order to reject it.
Well, these Enlightenment values, this is another thing I wanted to ask. Can one really derive this just from the Judeo-Christian tradition? I've always thought it came more from classical Greece, and then the Renaissance humanists and so forth. I don't get the idea that the Bible has an idea of democracy, open-mindedness, the search for truth, and so forth, precisely because God made us to be His servants and issues decrees and so on, which is not a worldview without honor and value either. But I just, I don't know that you'd have voting or intellectual debate in ancient Israel or the early church. And,
well, you did in the
IDF. Values is coming from the Greek heritage.
Well, as a matter of fact, you do. Where the Spirit of the Lord is, there is liberty. And under the new covenant, the new church says, all right, vote yourselves deacons in. Vote your own leadership in. So you don't have elders and deacons imposed upon the local congregation, but the people themselves look among themselves, and they choose their own leadership. So Samuel Rutherford and Lex Rex, for the famous the Bloodless Revolution that happened in Scotland and England, which led to the American Revolution, says that if God allows the church to govern itself, then the state can govern itself. We, the people, must elect our representatives. So it is upon the New Testament model of the independent, self-regulating, autonomous congregation that we have, the model that politically arrived with the American Revolution and, of course, with the English Revolution. Have you ever read any of Francis Schaeffer?
Oh, yeah. In fact, he has always puzzled me with what I imagine is supposed to be presuppositionalism, but doesn't sound like it. I've been fascinated with him for many years, but never quite understood what he thought he was doing.
Well, I studied under. He was my dear friend. I was in Europe with him in Switzerland.
Wow.
He's the only evangelical ever made it onto the cover of Time until Rick Warren, I guess. I would love to sit down and talk with you. Where do you live, Bob?
Selma, North Carolina, about an hour west of Raleigh, east of Raleigh.
Well, now and then I get to New York City, but I don't get down to the Tar Heel State. There's some stuff maybe I'd like to send you that would help, I think, in terms of understanding Francis. He was truly a genius. People like to say he was a pseudo-intellectual, but I've seen him hold his own in debates at Harvard, at Yale. He knew his stuff. He really did, but he was an attempt to simply say, in order to say that something is evil, take George Smith, The Case Against God. In one chapter, he says everything is relative. We don't have these absolute concepts of good and evil. The very next chapter, the evils of Christianity, where you can't have your cake and eat it too. If you don't believe there is such a thing as truth, then how can you say Christianity is not true? Mm-hmm. If you believe we need to be tolerant of all views, why is it the evangelical is shouted down and told to shut up? Mm-hmm. There needs to be culturally an understanding that a true tolerance means that all ideas must compete in the marketplace, and that we shouldn't automatically exclude historic Christians from the dialogue. And this is what Schaeffer felt needed to be said in art, in music. I had a Bible study at Juilliard School of Music in New York City for 2 years among the artistic folk, which I truly love those young people.
Reggie, did you want to say something?
I can't even remember my point now.
Okay.
But earlier, well, actually, I remember now a little bit. Earlier, I listened to Bob talk about, and you as well. Basically, we're animals. Everything that humans touch, we destroy, which almost seems pretty much inevitable in the universe anyway. That everything is destroyed eventually. But why is it that you think human beings can't come together on their own and develop a system of morality?
Well, they can. They're just not going to be consistent in what they develop.
Why? And why do you think this
human
is the case?
Human beings develop systems of morality every time they legislate law. But the
Right.
question is, what is the basis? Suppose I'm a citizen of that particular community and I come along and I don't like your law. So I have a difference of opinion concerning the law that our society has made that governs my morality.
Mm-hmm.
At that point, it's my opinion against the government's opinion.
Well, I would hope knowledge would have a lot to do with that, assisting in this. As Doc Morey mentioned earlier, he talked about in Islam and Iran, it's still legal for a 54-year-old man to marry an 8-year-old girl or something of that nature. Well, the more we learn about human beings, human nature, the more we learn about the way individuals perceive themselves, autonomy, what do we think a person at a particular age would be able to make certain decisions? At what particular age would they be able to make certain sound decisions? Once we learn more about those things, we can then look at that and say, that might not be a good age at which a girl should be able to get involved in something like this, considering now more of what we know. And I think that would be the case. And it's up to us to sit down and talk about it and discuss these things and figure out, based on new knowledge, what is the best way to go to make our lives better and easier. And the best way is trying to get along with each other. And that's.
But why is that a virtue? I mean, why should I want to have an easy life? I mean, why? I mean, we all do, but the question is why?
Do you want to have a hard life? I don't think any animals, even in nature, you see, nobody wants to really have a hard life.
Well,
I mean,
saying.
Many of us. You eat because you want to survive. I mean, if you wanted to be miserable, you just simply wouldn't eat. That doesn't require logic. That doesn't require God. And I think we can expand that to many aspects of our lives. And the more we learn about how to take care of the desires we have, I think the better we can make the world. But we have to learn and educate and share knowledge with each other. And I really think we can do it. We don't need a God to do that. And even if there is a God, what model are we looking at? And that's another problem we have. According to the Bible, you got a God who does all these horrendous, malicious acts against people. It's really hard to know. And you yourself, Gene, last time I was on your program, I asked you, if God told you to kill me, would you do it? And you said, after a little while, you said, "Well, yeah, I guess if God told me,
no,
you're
confusing me. You're confusing me with somebody else. I'd never say that. I said
Really?
God wouldn't tell me to kill you.
I know you did, but eventually, I finally got you to admit that if God did, though,
No, I don't believe in God is continuing in special revelation in that manner. So I would have never said that, Reggie. And if I
Really?
did, then I stand corrected. But I don't think I said that because I believe that God's revelation to mankind is complete in the 66 books of the Bible. So God's not going to tell me to do anything, especially something that's contrary to his law.
What do you make of the stuff in 1 Samuel and Joshua and so forth where there is genocidal warfare commanded by the angel of the Lord or Samuel or so forth?
Well, there's a difference between war and my relationship with my neighbor. Those are nations fighting against nations. And
Wouldn't that be comparable to jihadism, though?
Well, Bob, to be altogether fair, not once in the Torah or in the Tanakh was a Gentile confronted by a prophet, a priest, a king, and told, if you do not convert to Judaism, we will kill you. There were no wars to convert the Goyim. If anything, it was to kick the Goyim out, to retain the ethnic purity of the Jew. But jihad has as its focus the conversion of non-Muslims. Jihad also guarantees paradise. Whereas
actually
the
better than
civil
just
wars
the
never did that.
offing of all the Amalekites?
Yeah, well,
I'd rather have the opportunity to stay alive as a Muslim.
Yeah, but see, they gave no
butchered.
option. Yeah, they gave no option to any of them, the Canaanites, the Philistines. Well, if you convert, we won't kill you. They were not given that option, were they?
No.
But I mean, that makes it even worse, doesn't it?
No, it's the same thing as an atomic bomb at Hiroshima and Nagasaki. It means when you have national warfare of aggression in war, you have collateral damage. And it doesn't matter. We wanted to bring World War II to a conclusion. We did the firebombing of Dresden. Remember what happened in Europe and the atomic bombs in Japan. We have the mutually assured destruction of millions and millions of people, and that is just nothing more than what they did was their own form of massive warfare, totalitarian war, total warfare. We do it today.
Yeah, speaking of which, Maury, isn't it true that you, I believe before last program you were here with me, you believe that you believe that the U.S. government should nuke Mecca, right?
No, not Mecca. There's a building called the Kaaba, and I've been on, the Michael Medved show. I've been in ABC, New York City, Hugh Hewitt on down the line, John Gamble. The final answer to terrorism is a psychological one, because terrorism is primarily a psychological problem, and and in order to deal with that, psychological warfare would ask, what threat would give bin Laden pause not to do any further damage to people? Well, there's only one thing that a Muslim fundamentalist or fanatic holds near and dear, and that's the Kaaba, because that's the building around which he must circle 7 times during jihad. He must kiss the sacred stone. He prays to it 5 times a day. And the clergy have said, if the Kaaba is ever destroyed, Islam is destroyed with it. So the mere threat would give pause to the terrorist, and the fact that, what's the name of that congressman, Tancredo, he and I talked about this, that this threat, that look, if you people do something horrific here in the United States, another 9/11, we're going to blow up that building in the middle of the night. We're not talking about the loss of life. We're not talking about bombing that building when the pilgrims are surrounding it. That building goes, and that would psychologically devastate the terrorist, because he has no place to pray to, no place to pilgrimage to, and his religion has fallen down.
I said the same thing on 9/12. I'm glad to hear you say that. Hector Avalos, I believe, says that in his atheist book about religious violence.
Here.
What's that? I'm sorry?
I'm sorry, yeah, I have that here. Fighting words.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah. I think is that possibility taken seriously by anyone in the government? Because it makes loads of sense to me.
Well, I sent my book is entitled "Winning the War Against Radical Islam," and it deals with home security, registration of Muslims, illegal immigration. But the final part of the process is when we eventually, if we're forced to, blow up a building. Now, this is taken seriously by generals. We sent the book to every member of the Pentagon. Private channel. Now, that's why, remember General Frank got fired?
Yeah.
Tommy, at a press conference, he said, well, if they don't stop, we might have to bomb Mecca. He got fired out of that.
What do you know? I'm sorry to say I didn't know that.
Yeah,
Condoleezza Rice appreciated my book. I have congressmen who have told me in private. But right now, the politically correct forces are so strong that beside Congressman Tancredo saying it publicly, and then he caught hell for it, but people in privately told him the same thing. Remember World War II, the suicide bombers, the kamikazes, we had to deal with a devastating psychological attack against this whole religiously motivated suicide, and that was to force the emperor to go on national radio in Japan and say, I am not God. Mm-hmm. And General MacArthur forced the emperor of Japan to disavow divinity, which undercut Shintoism, which was the religious motivation for the kamikaze.
Right.
And we're in the same situation. I mean, if
Amen.
If the Catholics decided to go on the rampage again, like they had with the Crusades, and I don't defend that, that's still violence and warfare. That was Catholic jihad, period. The Inquisition was Catholic jihad. But if the only way to stop Catholic jihadism was to blow up the Vatican, I would suggest we first remove the art, then blow it up. But to me, we would save billions of dollars and hundreds of thousands of lives if we simply would get rid of that Kaaba. Liberal Islam would go on in triumph because it's disconnected from history and reality anyway.
Really? That's quite interesting. I'm sorry, but I must admit, Dr. Morey, last time you were on the program, we all thought you were talking about just wife turning back into glass, and that you didn't care about how many people
No, I
killed.
Didn't say that. No, I never talked about nuking it. That was Tancredo said to nuke it.
Right.
You know, Reggie, the quality of your phone connection has dramatically diminished.
Yeah, I had a problem with my phone. I guess the battery went dead, so now I have you on my speakerphone, unfortunately. Can you hear me okay now?
Yeah, it's just a little bit muffled, but we've been going about an hour. I think that this is proof positive that atheists and Christians can actually get along.
Oh, yeah.
You know, this is like the...
if I'm doing the cooking.
Yeah, you may not know this, but Dr. Bob Morey is a chef. And, he's a trained chef.
A great gift.
I just made for my wife cream of artichoke soup tonight. She's groaning in ecstasy. I call it Epicurean orgasms.
All right. Well, we've been going for about an hour, and I want to tell all of you that I've enjoyed the conversation. I think that there's a lot more room for dialogue here, and I'd like to return to the subjects at hand sometime in the future if all of you are willing.
Great.
And continue discussing this. And
I do want, Bob, if you could contact me, just Dr. Bob at faithdefenders.com. I'd like to send you some stuff. I would really be interested in your analysis.
Oh, great. So Dr. Bob at faithdefenders.com.
Yep, that's all you need. I have a book on the Trinity. I think you would appreciate.
It's a great book.
Terrific.
In fact, I just read it. It's over 600 pages. And I'm firmly believing that it's the best book that's ever been written on the Trinity because it addresses the doctrine from the a priori assumptions that everybody enters into the debate about, or with, I should say. So I was really blessed by that book, Dr. Bob. Well, we're out of time, so let's say goodbye. And until next time, may the Lord open our eyes to His Word, and may we continue to pursue truth as it's revealed in God's Word. This has been the Atheist Hour. My name's Gene Cook. Goodbye.